Hi, my name is Dana Arnett, co-host of Wicked Marketing, along with my partner, Carlos Cepene. You can find more information about us and our business on LinkedIn, or if you have any questions, email us at info@wickedbionic.com. Subscribe to Wicked Marketing on Apple Podcasts and write an awesome review for us. We're also on iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Google Play. Thanks for listening.
Hi, this is Carlos.
And this is Dana.
And today we're going to be talking about Millennial and Gen Z marketing. So one of the things that I think people are tired of is hearing about the millennial generation.
Millennials.
Millennials.
How do you get them? How do you get them?
How do you get them?
It is really a them, right? I mean, it's hilarious. I'm like, there's other people coming up after them that are going to matter too. It's like this gold manna from heaven if you can figure out how to get to a millennial, right?
I know, right? And it's like, even the millennials are making fun of it. I don't know if you see really? the hey boomer responses. It's like,
terrible.
It's so aggravating for the poor boomers. I am actually a Zennial, so I happen to be at the cusp of millennial and
right. I'm at the low end of the boomer. Okay, I still have plenty to say.
You got a boomer, half Gen X, half millennial.
And what do we have at the office?
Telling you how to connect. The what?
What's Jessica at the office? She's a Gen Z.
Oh, she's a Gen Z.
Oh, it's such a great generational divide here. It's awesome.
There you go. So we got you covered on this podcast.
I think that I spend far more money than the millennial or the Gen Z. Just saying. So you should market to me.
It depends. It depends on which millennial and Gen.
I might not have.
So one thing that's being talked about quite a bit recently is how millennials are the quitter generation. So that's a new one. And the point is not that they're quitting their jobs or anything. It's that the goal of some of the millennials has become to quit the workforce as fast as possible. So to generate as much revenue as they can, or as much savings as they can, the fastest that they can, so that they can go and quit. Yeah, they can go retire as fast as possible. So that's going to be interesting to see.
It's such a rush. I hope their retirement is good, boy. You gotta have some good.
I think it has to do with this perception that okay. So let's take a step back, because this will make sense in a second. This is so when we talk about millennials, we know that it's the digital generation, but what people don't necessarily connect is the fact that the way that millennials grew up is the reason the millennials are the millennials, right? Because millennials grew up during the second Great Depression, right? The big crash of 2008, 2009. And so they grew up in families that were struggling to keep up with paying everything, right? During the time of extreme high unemployment. So their parents had multiple jobs that were not high paying jobs. So they were out on the street all the time, or they were not able to pay for childcare. So millennials were in the back seat of their cars while they were running around doing deliveries or anything that had to do with generating more income for the family. And they also grew up, whereas Gen Xers grew up in families where maybe one parent worked and they had the other parent at home, whether it was the mom or the dad were at home. This generation grew up with both parents working. So when you grow up in that environment, I've always said that I was lucky enough to live in the generation that was still able to sit with their parents at night to dinner and talk to them and have a connection with them. Both my parents worked, even though my mom worked a lot more than my dad did, but there still was that person around the house that had the authority, right? So my authority figure came from home. Whereas for millennials, because both their parents worked, and they were either placed in their grandparents' care, or they had some form of activity they were put into, or they were literally connected to a computer all the time, because they grew up in that era of the broad availability of computers and mobile devices. They missed the opportunity to develop authority figures that were in their immediate space. Mm-hmm. They developed authority figures that they found through their social space.
That's right. That's right. You know, one of the interesting things, I think, what I love about the millennial generation, one of the, this 2019 Business Wire report, they said that millennials prefer shopping online and care more about social and environmental issues being addressed by the brands they buy from. And that's part of it too. I think some of those things you kind of get in your home, and it makes sense if you're not getting that kind of understanding about like there's this care and attention, you're going to look for and make sure that things that are important to you, like social responsibility, you know, it matters. So I think that they're looking in purchasing, you know, that's what this report was talking about, you know, that it influences their purchasing, that brands care about the things that are important to them. And
I think, again, that goes back to, and that's the later millennials, more going into the Gen Zers that are so socially, I call them social activists in particular. The Gen Z side has become the activist side, the Greta Thunberg side of the generation. But with what happened with the millennials was that because they didn't develop that authoritative figure with their parents, and they saw them working all the time and really focused on just keeping their heads above water because of the economies at the time, they failed to have some of the experiences that the older generations got to have with their parents, like going to the park and going camping and like those type of activities where you correlated your family and your environment with nature, with connecting, with those activities just didn't happen that often, right? Or as often as we had exposure to them. So what they've developed is a perception of the older adults as being dedicated solely to work, solely to that being the priority for them. And whereas in the Gen X generation, you got to see parents that were more concerned about the future that they were leaving to their kids. In the millennial generation, they were more concerned about the immediacy of the present instead of the future that they're leaving behind. So what that left was lack in the perception that Gen X is interested in what they're leaving behind. So, and that correlates to the environment, right? So one of the priorities of millennials is that by the time that they get to be the older generation, that there is an environment for them, right? That there is oxygen in the air to breathe, and that we've not overheated this planet to the place that they literally live in a beach all day.
Well, so, you know, I want to say one of the things as a comparison is that Gen Z, you know, and it makes sense in the stories that you're telling, you know, Gen Zs do not trust advertising, and they rely more on authenticity from sources that are like their peers or influencers. And we were talking about it earlier, you know, influencer marketing is the key to reaching Gen Zs because they are word of mouth. And so they don't trust advertising necessarily, whereas the millennials, it seems, are looking to the brand to bring an authority to them, right? I mean, I think
absolutely. And it's not only so that same connection of the influencer has become not only a person, but a brand. A brand can be an influencer to a millennial, right? So Nike is a brand that does this amazingly within the sports space, right? So they've created this perception not only of being the coolest brand in sportswear out there, but about being the most socially proactive, or one of the most socially proactive brands out there. So that connects at two levels, right? It connects at that influential level, but it also connects at the emotional level, and it tugs at the heartstrings of what millennials care about. Now, that's in the millennial space. When you start talking about the Gen Z space, which is really where brands need to be focusing on now, because this generation is the one that is now going to be, or has already started entering the marketplace, has already started becoming parents as well. And so they're becoming head of households and decision makers within those households. If you're planning for your brand for the next 5 years, that's really the generation to focus on how are you going to connect with them, because they're the ones that have the longest lifetime value right now for your brand going forward. They are socially activist, not socially active, activist. So they're very passionate about connecting only with brands that are actively engaged in taking care of the environment, of their people, of their employees, of their areas where they're in, and being responsible within whatever segment of the marketplace they are.
And they're not shy about saying that they're not shy about saying that it's not working for them.
And they have the tools to point it out.
That's right.
Right? Because they're the generation that grew up with social media. So while the millennials grew up with digital devices, right, and maybe MySpace or ICQ back in the day, this generation grew up with all different sorts of social media, visual mediums, like Instagram, where they can communicate through photography and through different visuals, mediums like Facebook that are very much about highlighting family connections. So Twitter that are very newsworthy and easily spreadable news. And they're also very much aware of the fake news movement, right? So within that political space, because they're such activists, they are aware of the divide that exists right now in that Gen X and mostly Boomer generation. That's a political divide. And so they tend to be the generation that is more independent of the two political parties. They tend to be able to connect with some of the principles of the Democratic Party and some of the principles of the Republican Party, and make it their own. So they're not that, even though we see a lot of the influence because the voter base is within the Boomer and Gen X, mostly, what you're seeing is a disconnect from the Gen Z. Like they're not coming out to vote for Bernie Sanders because they still feel like, even though he represents a lot of the things that they care about, he doesn't represent everything they care about. So there's more need for people that are going to be more in the middle. And that's how your brand needs to connect with them, right? So be active within the environment that you're in. Be active. If you're in fitness, then reflect how fitness can be good for the environment. Reflect how fitness can be good for mental health. Reflect how like things that we probably spoke about in conversations and at home before are things now that are at the forefront in the decision-making process. There's this idea of quitting brands. If your brand is disconnected from the social environment or the social responsibility, in a matter of minutes, your brand could be decimated by social media within the Gen Z.
Right.
Yeah.
I was thinking about, the B2B marketing, because we kind of talk in general terms about all different platforms. And I found one of the most interesting things with it, that there are 87 million millennials on LinkedIn, and 11 million of them are in decision-making positions. And, it's such an interesting thing when you think when you're B2B, you're not, and you want to attract millennials, you're not thinking necessarily LinkedIn as a platform. But boy, if you craft your messaging correctly and they're in decision-making positions, I mean, that's the way to grow in a very different way, I think, because that's...
Well, and I think that's a great point that you're making. So when connecting with millennials, if you are going to leverage things like LinkedIn, be aware that what is the most important to millennials is the connections that you have already. So the people 100%. That you're connected with 100%. And how reliable those connections are, what environment those connections are in, what the perception of the brands that those connections are in is highly important and is going to become even more important to future audiences as well.
Absolutely. We're sharing a lot of data with you, and that's from a report that the Wicked Bionic team, we spent a number of months creating, kind of aggregating over 20 different high-level sources to be able to share in one report. Really, we call it multicultural, but really to market to any generation or any culture. And so that's something, if you'd like a free PDF download of our report, it's like 10 pages and provides, it's not super dense. It'll give you some ideas and some statistics, as well as some solutions and things that you can do to attract certain audiences. And you can get that free PDF report at marketingmeansdiversity.com. That's marketingmeansdiversity.com. And I think you'll find it super useful and for many things, but we put a lot of time in and hopefully to make something that's super clear on how to reach target markets.
And that's one of the things that you'll notice in that report is that there are things that we maybe discuss in passing or maybe associate with certain generations, but this report will give you the actual numbers that are tied to what is effective, what has been shown to be effective. And this is not a report that we just wrote, right? It's a report that we pulled from over 20 sources that are reputable data sources like Business Insider and different research firms out there in the marketplace that have done these studies with larger groups of people that are the type of studies that big brands do in order to determine their audience subsets and how to target people. And smaller brands or medium-sized brands may not have the budgets to be able to execute these sort of studies. So it gives you a very top-line idea, but it's a starting place for you to create your communications when targeting multicultural, multi-generational, which is so important nowadays in order for your messaging to be effective. And not only effective, but to have your dollars stretch to have an effect on your top line and bottom line in a way that there is less advertising waste nowadays, or less need for advertising waste nowadays. And what I mean by advertising waste is, in the past, you would grab a big chunk of money and put it on TV and just hope that some of the people that watched your video were interested in the messaging that you were delivering, right? Now you don't have to do that. Now you can even still do TV, maybe over the top, like the direct to the apps. That's where millennials are watching their TV, right? But now you're able to do that targeted. You're able to say, I want this video to go to people that are 18 to 34, and this different video to go to people that are 35 to 55, and have targeted messaging going to them so that you're connecting with them in the way that is going to have the highest ROI for your brand.
And you'll get to see in the report too, as we took our expertise when we culminated all this information, and then we really crafted solutions from the data. So again, that's marketingmeansdiversity.com. Download your free report. And we're Dana and Carlos from Wicked Bionic, and so glad that you were able to listen to us today, and hope you found it helpful.